So I just want to talk real quick about right and wrong as the concepts as I understand them and my perspective on this idea. And I don't know who these quotes are attributed to, and sometimes searching them up doesn't always produce anything. But I know that they are not original thoughts, and I was probably not the first person to think them, and I probably got them from somewhere. Therefore, I'm not going to play it off as if I thought of them, although I do not know the source. They might have come from me originally, but I somehow doubt that. They're a little bit too astute. So I'm just going to explain my perspective on right and wrong is that there's no such thing as a moral good or evil, because there are things that are evil that most people have always thought were evil, but then there are things that are evil that people haven't always thought were evil. So if there was something objective, then everyone would have pointed it out, and you would see a lot of things like necessary evils and stuff. That would come up a lot more in regards to things like slavery and mutilation and stuff like that for criminals, but you just don't see that, and so people wouldn't have come to the rationalization of corporal punishments if they were inherently objectively morally evil. And then people wouldn't have stopped doing it if they were objectively morally good or something like that. So that's why I don't believe that there's such a thing as an objective moral good or evil, because it changes over time and it's influenced by the society you live in. But there are some things that are morally good and morally wrong that most people agree on. What usually the debate is now is what is the extent. Like, how morally evil is it to accidentally kill someone? Most people would agree that you should go to jail for accidentally killing someone, manslaughter, like if through negligence or something like that. But then what is negligence? What is that line? That's where you're starting to get these moral gray areas where it's fuzzy. Is it wrong that something you did killed someone because they were dumb and made a mistake on something, or like let's say you're like bungee jumping and they unhook the bungee and die. Is that your fault because you didn't have something that made it so they couldn't do that? That's where it starts getting morally gray. And essentially, if you had enough time and enough people, you could probably reach a conclusion of where there is about a consensus about where the gray area begins, maybe. But I don't think you could ever reach a consensus on what is in the gray area. I think if you surveyed the entire populace, you could reach a consensus at about what point the gray area begins. I think you could reach, an approximate consensus that at this point, like murder, most people would say objectively evil to murder somebody else. Like, I don't think that anyone would ever say to murder someone in cold blood, especially premeditated, is good in any way. They might say that if it's an assassination of somebody else that's evil, most people would say it's still wrong to murder someone in cold blood, but they might justify that the person you murdered makes it less bad. But I think most people would agree that's still bad to kill anybody, even if they're like completely evil. If they're not trying to kill you. And so you reach this kind of consensus that, these things are pretty much established to be good, except for maybe in some fringe cases, and then these things are pretty much established to be bad, except for maybe in some fringe cases. But then you get to the point where you have to think about things like, if this is right, then what is wrong? So when you get protesters that saying it is right to riot and to pillage and to destroy, then what is wrong at that point? And you realize that the list is pretty short, especially when they're condemning killing. If you accidentally kill a few of the people you're riding against, or if your cops die in the riot, it's okay. Then you look at the list of things that are wrong, and you find that there's little to nothing left. And that's why you have to realize that this is one of the justifications for peaceful protesting. Because if you become as monstrous as this, where nothing is left to be wrong, then anything you produce can't be anything other than evil, because you have used evil to obtain it. So it's already going to be tainted. Essentially, like, even if you use a coup or something to dispose of a despot, it's always going to be not the best system of government. And a lot of times the coup might be even worse, because you have used a method of which people will no doubt die in order to try and bring about good. And so you will never achieve the best system by doing that. You might achieve quite a good one, but you can never be the best system if you are a system that is willing to sacrifice others in order for the advancement. That and doesn't give pause to it. Like nobody in a coup is thinking, well, God, this might be really bad for our people. That's not how coups work. It's a power grab. Now, it just might turn out that the people that are grabbing the power might be better than the people who had it previously. Or it could be the other way around. Just look at the Russian Revolution. You have the czars and you have the Soviets essentially. So eventually you end up with Stalin. And most people would say that Stalin was probably worse than the czars. The czars were pretty bad, but most people would probably say Stalin was worse. And so you get to the point where you realize that because you did a violent and bloody revolution, then assassination and murder, that now you have people that are evil that are running your country. Because those are the people that are willing to go to those lengths. And it sounds a little bit convoluted, but the more evil you do and everything, or like the more objectionable things you do in order to inspire change, the worse the change will be at the end. So if you do peaceful protesting, you notice that you'll change people's minds faster, and you'll also produce a better society at the end. Which is why I've always disliked Malcolm X, because his methods would only create a society in which more hatred is present. Whereas one of my personal heroes, Martin Luther King Jr., his methods will only create a society in which people love each other if people follow what he does, where they peacefully protest and they believe that everyone's equal and they just have a dream that their kids can play with kids of other races and no one will judge them. That is where you get a good society, by starting from a place of good. Whereas if you start from a place of hatred, all you do is produce a society that is filled with hatred. And then moving on to, if everyone else does something wrong, it's still not right. And that's where you get why I don't believe in like moral relativism, where it's like, oh, it's just a part of their culture. If it's just a part of your culture to throw gays off of buildings, that does not make throwing gays off of buildings morally good. And nothing ever will make throwing gays off of buildings morally good, or stoning women for being raped. None of these things will ever be morally good. And so it is absolutely pointless to say that, oh, morals are just relative. No. Your perception of morals is the morals that you have. So nothing in the world will ever convince me that throwing gays off of buildings is okay. And so to the people that say it's okay when they do it, no, you cannot have morals that say, oh, it's okay if this group does it, but it's not okay if this group does it. So if you're against throwing gays off of buildings in the United States, you must be against throwing gays off of buildings in Saudi Arabia if you're truly against throwing gays off of buildings. If you are not against throwing gays off of buildings in Saudi Arabia, you are not against throwing gays off of buildings. It's just the way that it works. If you are not, you cannot be against you cannot be against the whole group of things if you are not against a part of the group. And so this is what really bothers me about this whole like cultural relativism and moral relativism, where it's somehow just passable for other countries to have cultures in which atrocities are committed against minorities, or they're committed against gays or lesbians or what have you. And so this doesn't really make much sense to me, how people can justify that their actions are okay. Because you're basically saying, if you say that what they do in Saudi Arabia to gays is okay, therefore you are saying that if we were to do it here in the United States, it would also be okay. And if they were to come to the United States and throw United States citizens that are gay off a building, you would still be okay with it. Because it's them doing it, and it's their culture. And so therefore you are advocating for gays to be thrown off buildings if you say that it is okay that they do that because it's just a part of their culture. Then you were saying that if they were to come here and do it, it would also be okay. Which means that if I was to adopt Saudi Arabian culture, I would therefore be allowed to throw gays off of buildings. If I was to somehow become a Saudi, I could throw gays off of buildings, then it would be okay. And I know this is like an extreme example, but it just illustrates the point quite effectively. That if you are okay with this like system of moral relativism, then you are okay with every act that they do, of every act that's done in the world that you say is just it's just part of their culture or it's just their system of morals is okay. And that's just insane to me. How you could ever say that, you know, this is okay. Like, it just baffles the mind how you could ever essentially try and justify that beating gays is okay, stoning women is okay, cutting the hands off of thieves is okay. All these things. You're saying that if we were to adopt like Sharia law here in the United States, you would be okay with everything enacted under that. Basically, if you say you're a cultural relativist or a moral relativist, you are against any member of the gay, lesbian, LGBT community. You're against all of them and all of their rights. You're against women having equal rights. You're against all sorts of things. You are against cruel and you are against us protecting from cruel and unusual punishment. You are trying to say that cruel and unusual punishment is okay, and discrimination is okay, a non-secular state is okay. You're saying all of these things are morally right, because if you fail to condemn something as being morally wrong, then you are essentially saying that if it's okay if they do it, therefore it is okay if everyone does it. Because there should be no reason why it's only okay if they do it. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know if everyone else agrees, but I don't really care. There's no reason for anyone to hold any more relativistic positions because as long as there's one atrocity in the world committed by a culture, you are saying that that atrocity is okay, and that's unacceptable. Thank you for listening.